So, hello and welcome to another D6 Learning event. Today, we're discussing with George and Pietro the creation of indie center map RTS strategy medieval game Becoming Sent. One of the most unique games of the last year, easily, and also a game that has quite a bit to show us when it comes to how we can do innovative and unexpected things in the development. Now, before we start, I am Costadinos. I'm one of the main lecturers at D6 Learning, and so is George, and also so is Pietro, who does teach a narrative design course. And D6 Learning is an online school that specializes in game dev, but also IT and coding and art. I will be posting our socials and links in a while in the channel. But first, Pedro, say a short hi, and then George, you can also introduce yourself.
Hi to everyone. Thanks for having me. And I'm Pietro of Open Lab. We're a micro game development company creating indies, particularly narrative with indie games with sort of narrative content in Florence, in Italy.
And George?
Excellent. Thank you for being here with us, Pietro. As Costadino said before, I'm George. I am a tutor, lecturer, and programmer, and I teach some of the courses from our school in distance learning. And I'm also a game developer and machine learning scientist.
Excellent. So we are here in order to mainly discuss Becoming Sent, and Pietro will be doing a pretty thorough presentation of how this game came to be. But before we start, I would like to first ask Pietro, like, how exactly did you go on and decide that you are going to make a strategy game about faith and sin and sainthood set in medieval Italy? Which is like my main question.
Well, I will enter into the details how I came to the concept. Let's say that the start was a random discovery that becoming saint is a career, one, and two, that I personally, as often happens to game designers, I personally greatly enjoy little simple strategy tactical games. And I said, well, wouldn't it be nice to have this kind of game where somehow there's more structure to the narrative and more, let's say, connection between narrative choices and mechanics. And so this is the base inspiration where I started from.
Fantastic, thanks. So, George, you'd like to ask Pietro something too before
Oh,
we begin?
yes, I would like to get the boring stuff from from the table and ask right away what was your production pipeline on this. Not very a very detailed, of course, explanation. I'm not here uh, um, to delve too deep into this, but I would really love to see how you approach this, since you are one of a relatively small team. And this very, very creative game. It's one of those that you see and you automatically say that there's a huge production value here. So, how did this whole thing start, design-wise and production-wise, prototyping, a little bit of stuff like this?
Yes. So first of all, something that I maybe it's not we never tell enough clearly. This is a game where the vast majority of work has been done by just two people. So I did like 99% of the coding and the game design, and my partner Pino did all the design and animation. Of course, we were helped by some really great guys, but in the end, we two did the vast majority of the game, which also, of course, implies limitations in scope and in what we can actually do. For the production flow, I started, as I usually do, with doing a lot of historical research on sources and about how the procedure of becoming saint and the heretics of the 14th century Italy and the economic kind of context and evolution. And from the coding part to this is something I learned through the years. I will show you also some slides of the making of jumping as quickly as possible. This is something I really urge everyone to do, to a working prototype, by which can be even a textual prototype, just texts and numbers, but something that has feedback. And in parallel doing some game design document and work. But of course, as anybody who has experience in this, it's a continuous flow. So basically, once you do the game design, kind of game design document and spreadsheets, you do the first. When the prototype starts running, you should have to absolutely throw away everything you've done so far, and because otherwise, as the prototype will evolve, probably quicker than any kind of documentation can become a burden, and you may start to become, let's say, very affectionate to ideas that don't actually seem to be running, but you're just affectionate to the ideas, and this is very commonly a kind of sort of mistakes and waste of production. And of course, if you're just two people or even a solo developer, you must optimize production as much as you can. So I would, but still this back and forth between prototype documentation of some sort, I think, is a healthy kind of loop. And this is how we proceeded. We actually had a very rough prototype of the game, just a few months, I think.
Did you build it in engine or did
Yes,
you
in engine, but that's because I'm by now very comfortable with the Unity engine, and I think it's quite a remarkable tool for quick prototyping, even if it's not your end game support. And yeah, this is basically how we went, and this kept going and going. I must say that differently from previous game, we in this kind of production, we try to keep the mechanics as central and have the narrative as kind of emerging
Mm.
from the development, instead of having, let's say, a more linear branching narrative defined from the start and then working the mechanics on top of it, which is what we did in the previous games. And I think this is more fruitful as approach, but of course it depends on taste, genre, resources, organization.
That's true.
I hope in the slides to show you how somehow when there's a context that is has some depth in history and content, and then you have a working mechanics, narrative can always, and storytelling can emerge from in very different ways. Of course, we use the term environmental storytelling, but that's very generic. But it can be from characters, from situations, from maps, from architecture. Just a random reference there. And all these kind of things are things that actually in Becoming Saint we have worked a lot to give some depth and storytelling capacity to all these elements.
So fantastic. Thanks. What I'm thinking is maybe we go into you so you can start actually focusing on talking about the making of the game. In the meantime, anyone and everyone in the chat, feel free to ask any questions or make any comments and suggestions that you think would be interesting or helpful or whatever. We will be passing them on to Pietro at the end. We also have our own questions. So Pietro, the floor is yours. We might interrupt you from time to time to perhaps ask something.
Yes, please do. So let's
So
say
let's start screen sharing.
yeah. Are we seeing this?
I think
We do now.
think we are. Yes.
Great.
Now we are.
So I'll start with it in a random dinner with a historian, a research in history. I found out something I didn't know about, that becoming a saint is a sort of career, and it has a very definite flow. This is probably clear as a flow. So there are stages, and of course this career mostly happens when after you die, and which is bizarre. I mean, quite special as a career, and it can last for centuries, and you may never reach the final stage. You can be partially successful in this, and as we can see here, you can be just defined as a servant of God, or go a bit further on and be beatified. And but then, with a final Pope intervention, you can actually become a saint. So I found this interesting, bizarre, and somehow a topic of the game, and I associated this to the roguelike and roguelite idea. So the fact that you may have a game where you seemingly often die and so somehow often fail, but this failure may become somehow a success after you're failing somehow in the game. And this is something that is deeply built inside Becoming Saint. And
question: would you argue that this was not just following trends, right? So you did actually, there was a point in making it a roguelite.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't even know about trends. and it's, I mean, Becoming Saint is clearly a roguelike kind of career, because the model fits perfectly. So and then there was the discovery of, I knew something about it because maybe I read million years ago, The Name of the Rose, which is of course one of the main, it's a book by Umberto Eco about this like a thriller whodunit case set in again in 13th century Italy, and it all and the heretic movement of the century, which somehow relate to Saint Francis' life, which is an extremely interesting case of the relationship between socio-political doctrine, the impact it has in a society, which is a society which is quickly developing a very powerful capitalistic model, which is evolving towards a financial model. Italy at the time was ruling somehow Europe through the control of the florin and of the money and the economy and the first banks. And so this is a very interesting situation and a very refined society, and with extremely conflicting values emerging. Of one side, this pauperistic movement inside the church was quickly becoming extremely rich, and the whole society was evolving towards this. And so it's a very interesting period of contrasts. And also the historical manipulation of the church of the life of these semi-heretics or recognized heretics, who sometimes become saint afterwards by changing, like the life of Saint Francis, the official doctrine of the life of Saint Francis, and the original sources, which we have recovered also by chance because the Franciscans had burned all the original sources, but the Dominicans hadn't, of course. And so the historians found in the Dominican monasteries the original stories of the life of Saint Francis, which are widely different from what is actually official doctrine. And this is a very interesting case of historical ideological manipulation, for example. So all this comes into this kind of research, and so I put together all this, created models, and one source one may look for is Fra Dolcino. The Dolcinians had very evolved view. Dolcino is interesting because this societal and political reformation idea go together with religious ideas, as often they do. And this is, and becoming saints as superficially seems more like a religious themed game, but in fact we don't deal much with direct with religion. It's actually mostly about societal organization, structure, and possible reforms, as were in fact historically the heretic movements, who were often in fact popular poor classes trying to, let's say, rebel against this diffusing capitalistic control of finance. So this is the real subject of the game. And of course the tone is, as always, this is the two inspiration. Pasolini, as you had mentioned before we streamed, Hawks and Spores, this incredible movie, has all these kind of themes, and the tone is always tragicomic, as in all our games. These are games that somehow inspired us, though I must say that I think it's very good to be very much inspired by other games when you start a game, if you like them very much. But if you have this kind of process, of course, the game that you obtain at the end is completely original and has a lot of bizarre and wild aspect by itself. And then we
can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
Have you played the Name of the Rose game on the 8-bits? This isometric.
It's a very old game, isn't it?
Very game. Yes,
I checked out the gameplay of it. I watched
nothing to do with the actual history, but it's one of the few things one can be inspired by when it comes to video games and the specific themes.
Yeah, well, the Name of the Rose is an amazing. I mean, please read the book.
Yeah, it's stunning.
The movie is not that bad, but the book is so dense of content, and inspiration goes in all directions. And he too, of course, has both a humoristic side and keeps showing up how any religious theme is linked to social practices and a context of behaviors and greed. Anyway, so coming back to the art of the game, we adopted this. The game is actually a bizarre isometric kind of view of towns, and some players I noticed don't realize that you can rotate town, zoom in, zoom out, and somehow move the camera while you're playing. You don't have to just play the fixed view that you have at the start. because it's actually a real 3D environment, but the characters are all 2D. So we found this also practical, but also very funny. And so we put this. So we merged this cartoon animated into the characters, rigged 2D characters into this 3D, some isometric environment. And so Pino did all this research for defining the style. And I think if you play the game, you'll find clear references to this kind of works. And of course, the representation in the medieval codex often of characters and events is very funny too. And so many things are very close to comics and as we know them today. And sometimes in the notes or the margins of the codexes, the scribes made very funny jokes and stuff, which we somehow referenced to. Yeah, and then there are several works of art of which we have direct quotes in the game. This is, for example, is the view of yourself somehow protecting all your followers, and your followers in the game, of course, are the most poor and dejected layers of society, but of course, the game allows you to choose different kind of politics. So you can also have real cavaliers following you, depending whether you go in a more, let's say, Machiavellian kind of style, and you can also change your mind during gameplay, change politics, change orientation, because of course the game pushes you. You can make all the the purest ideological choices, but then there is a problem. The game continuously bothers you, which is something that sometimes the players complain about, the fact that you have to provide food for your followers, and very strict, pure economic choices like nobody can touch money can make it difficult somehow to acquire enough food to feed everybody, and so and things like this. So we played around this in the game. And then was great to study the representation of maps. Of course, as we know, before Da Vinci Rimini map, the kind of standard view that we use today in maps wasn't the reference, and there were often maps were more in functional form more than in somehow objective space distance form, and it was for them was very practical. And of course, it's a perspective you can take. Often Italy was oriented with the east side up, and after you see the Christ enveloping the world map, and you see the little hands on the side of things, it's very cute. And also our map, it's also very distorted because we wanted to focus on independent town states, which was again a very strange and very modern somehow evolution. Many towns in Italy at the time got rid of the nobles and the princes, and they established guilds governing the towns. This was happened very quickly in Florence, in Milan, and this lasted for centuries. And it was a kind of completely new kind of post-medieval somehow organization institution. And these were, of course, the most active, more interesting towns, and they were most in the center north of Italy. So that part of the map is somehow distorted, expanded, and the rest is a bit more contracted because it was either strictly controlled by a king or the emperor or the pope. And yeah, and then we had to be careful because many towns are not generic but specific. So we have like Rome, we have Venice, maybe we can see it here, like Venice, but we have to be careful, like in Rome, not to put St. Peter because we are set in 1348 and St. Peter simply did not exist. so we chose the representative buildings of the time. The towns are semi-generative, so we use obstacles in the grid, like the Tower of Pisa is one of those obstacles, but it may be there or may not, depending on how the Italy was generated. We have patterns and things like that, which has also influenced the gameplay, because whether you're in an elevated position or not can give you an advantage. Yeah, and then this is the representation. This is the town of Marostica in Italy, but we chose that as the town where you're actually, it's Assisi in our game, so that's historical incoherence, where you're making all your speeches, because in the game you make these choices of what are the rules that the movement have to follow, and people will join or leave your movement according to your orientation. And also, you can see that when you make the speech, we show a tree of life, which is a typical medieval representation of saints and knowledge as a kind of structure used in medieval times. We also see a tree of dicks, which was also another medieval thing that they did, which is very bizarre for us, but it wasn't for them. And you can still visit them. There are a couple of them in Italy, and which was a symbol of life, of course. And yeah, this is how we went to represent Venice in the game. It's just an example from our sketches and drawings. And okay, so this was for let's say how the art. This is just a fraction, of course, of the work, because there are many towns which are customized completely, like Rome, Naples, Florence, Milan, Ancona, maybe Palermo too, that have historically somehow mapped representation. Then there is the question of making historical games, or let's say para-historical games, because they're not actually, I think that's the technical term used in game criticism. So it's a pseudo-historical game, not para-historical game. And yeah, and of course, as a media, we are not that much evolved frequently, and of course these games just follow the pattern of history, how it is still taught mostly, but it was how it was researched like 50 years ago. So it's mostly a sequence of kings, battles, emperors, and unfortunately, my kids at school get it taught still mostly in this way, and of course that's one view of it, but it's not the history of everyone. And so we try to have a kind of a different representation. Also, I must say that this kind of view is sort of perfect in a way. It's easy to fit, because in games we have this fact that the player has to be the center of action in a way. And so the history of heroes and kings somehow can be directly mapped to putting the player as somehow the ruler and the center of attention here. And so it's not that easy to escape this. And yeah, I'm not going to go too much into this, but we even have glorified genres, which actually glorify this view of history as colonization. Which goes in all directions. I mean, it's not just Europe, but anybody does it.
Mainly Europe, though.
But mainly Europe. If you have a narrow, more recent views, but before it went in all directions.
True.
Everybody would do it, and yeah, and then there's history as glorification of the winners, which everybody tries to do, and contemporary examples come to mind. But
Sorry, I have to once again intervene and say that the fact that we've already touched upon Pasolini and Gramsci shows that we're on the right path. So please go on.
We hope. And yeah, so again, but the fact that you have somehow so I'm doing a strategy game and it's a video game, so escaping completely the fact that the player has to be in control somehow of everything is very difficult. So what I thought, and this is the first experiment, I'm actually doing a new one which is more extreme in this, but in Becoming Saint, we try to think of you as a leader of a movement in which you have somehow a delegation from the movement, but it's not unconditional. So for example, in becoming saint, so here is shown all the ways you can die and start your career finally. So you can die beheaded by the emperor, burned by the pope, or hanged by the banks, merchant and banks, let's say, which were the three main power fighting for control in Italy at the time. And there's a fourth option, which the fourth option happens. This is a spoiler, but happens if you change politics too frequently in the game, because you're following interests, getting more food, getting more credit. So you're basically guiding it just for the expansion of your somehow ruling and your own charisma. Then people will throw you down a cliff because they feel betrayed. So somehow here you can see that it's a temporary delegation, not a complete delegation. Okay, so here I'm showing how the very first prototype of the conversion of a town was, and most of the elements were there: the units, the followers, and the control on a grid, and notice it was very difficult to rename the battles into confrontations. Okay, and in fact that it's a conversion, so nobody dies but you in this game. So when you go to a town with your followers, you're trying to convert them to your creed. So, and this can happen so every unit can be powerful in either speaking, cursing, blessing, shoving a bit. You can shove a bit to wake them up, let's say. And these are the way that units somehow fight each other. Okay. So and you can be differently powerful in convincing the others to movement. And so units can either run to your side during a sort of battle and become converted. Your units can run away to their side because they too can be convinced by the locals, or they can just panic. I mean, this is too much for them, and in this case they escape on the sides and they go down those pits, but it's just a symbol for them running away. And so here you start to see how even details in the mechanics and in the point scoring and in the strategy are actually inspired by somehow the historical and contextual and somehow narrative considerations and parameters. Yeah, so this kind of principle haven't changed from the prototype to the final game, and you can still see them in action.
Very short question. Now that you're talking about the mechanics of the battle, actually, and since we are talking about prototyping, which is exactly the time and place where you found out that this thing works and this thing doesn't, where exactly and how actually did you draw the line between the automatic parts of the battle and the ones that you actually have a direct handover?
Okay, this was and probably still is the most problematic part of the game and of the design. And we did because I must say there is a conflicting interest in this game. So I wanted this game to be somehow appealing to. Of course, it's classified as a strategy game. So there's a problem. When you're doing a really original game and also doing original mechanics, the problem comes with the marketing. Because the marketing, so games, communities, and even game platforms and engine, they really like games that fit to a genre, okay? Which is always what I try to break. So this is very problematic from the commercial point of view. Okay, so we tried and we partially succeeded and also somehow not I want to have a game that somebody who's not passionate of a strategy game and not an expert in strategy game can still play and play in the end well, and somehow to satisfy also the strategy players community. Maybe not the very, very hardcore, but those that like light quick games but still strategy games. So there was always somehow trying to appeal to both. I must say that the first game was very much more auto battler kind of like. So the kind of intervention that you made was very little. So you picked the units, you deployed them, and then mostly you could bless and curse from the outside as a saint. But in testing, we found out more and more that people wanted control and control. So now at the very start of the first battle, the game asks you whether you prefer to go in a kind of auto battler where you're still moving units. You can still move the units by hand, but if you don't do, they will run around and find an enemy. Or you can go in a more controlled kind of style where the units will not move by themselves, and so you will be moving the units. They will still always attack whoever they can automatically. Okay, and so in this way we somehow managed to adapt to two different profiles. So here for doing this seems a big change. Again, here prototyping it, testing it, we would never have thought about it if we didn't have a lot of feedback from players wanting more control. So releasing play test versions or even early access, if you like that. Though games with a lot of history narrative content, early access can be very problematic, because early access means that you have to probably follow a lot what people are telling you, which in a game which has a kind of strong message may be problematic. Anyway,
this also leads us to the question of how much value do you place on actual testing data? I mean, do you actually listen to feedback, or do you just observe what people do? I mean, if someone tells you, "Oh, I love it, but I don't like the plot. I don't like the setting. I just love how it plays." I mean, you obviously disregard like the thing that you don't care about, and you stick to the criticism that you care about. So how exactly do you handle that?
Well, I learned a lot about how to handle that, because most of the feedback that you get seems completely worthless. Most of the feedback, but I learned to read between the lines, and it isn't. So it's basically what they intend to say explicitly is mostly worthless, but what they don't manage to say explicitly, but somehow hides some intention or attempt or research, often can be extremely useful. So we change so much things, in particular in the battles, thanks to somehow indirect feedback. So if they're saying that this, I don't know, moving music doesn't work at all, which you read it as it does. So it's not a. So maybe we found maybe selecting unit when you turn the camera around becomes harder. Okay, so there's always an analysis and inference that you have to do. Others give you perfect feedback, of course, and of course there is always the problem that you have played the game 100 times, and so maybe either you don't see things, or you never test extreme conditions. So like, I don't know, like wild clicking. So maybe moving a unit from here to there, and then as soon as it starts moving it to another place, and clicking on the background while you're doing that. Developers tend not to do that. Okay, they click and they see where it goes, and then players can do the most wild things, and this is very important and very hard to catch. So this has to be taken literally. But my advice would be to listen even to the most negative feedback, sometimes you can find there some seed of something you can fix or evolve. And this of course this is a process that also implies resources and money. So in our case, these were quite limited in time, and so, but it can, again, it could go on forever, of course.
Okay, still the floor to you. I'm very much covered, so.
Okay, I can go on. Maybe let's see what's next. Yeah. So as I told you, the game is mostly centered on mechanics, but there is this part which is where you define the kind of rules that your movement adopts. Okay, so it's a long, at the end is a very long list of all the rules, like can we wear shoes from or can we have books, or yeah, what we do of the nobles when we convert a town. Do we hang them? Do we make them join our movement? Do they throw them out? Or how we redistribute land that we conquered somehow? Do we give it to the peasants who are already working on it? Do we give it to the movement, or do they give it to me to somehow? And yeah, the game is tricky. You can also build a cult, basically. There are 9 possible orientations that you can move from one to the other, from very Machiavellian to very pacifist to anarchist and so on. And that all depends on the choices. And the choices don't, I mean, they tell you somehow you have to read between the lines to understand. But if you replay the game will reveal explicitly the effect of any choice you already made in a previous playthrough. So the game is revealing explicitly its content the more you play. So this is kind of roguelike, kind of typical kind of roguelike support. And yeah, choices are always between 3 possibilities, which we find practical also from a user interface point of view. And you can always so the themes are divided in chapters. I think there are like 50-60 chapters in the game, and each one is a different theme. And you can always go back to the choice you make it and change them. And so once you adopt your choices, followers of different types may or may not decide to follow you. This is just a little animation of how a confrontation may happen. You can intervene from the outside by blessing and cursing, move the units, zoom in and run away, move one here or there, use elevation at your advantage, hide behind monuments, and so on. Also, you can, through the narrative, gain some magic items that you can throw into the battle, like a box of coin filled with coins. You throw the coins to distract and somehow confuse and tempt the local inhabitants and to join your movements or things like this. Or like, I don't know, like the hands of a dried hand of a pope, you throw it out again to create confusion. And yeah. Okay, so this is a bit about the 2 core mechanics. So converting people in towns and making choices, political choices. So once these were running, we started building what I call somehow an incremental narrative design. Because if you have if the base mechanics are running and somehow the parameters of the narrative somehow determine who is and who isn't following you, we started building on top of that, because of this can become boring, and you want somehow progression, not just of the unit levels, which is quite limited. We have units of 3-4 levels, because again, this is not a game for hardcore strategic players. It's not 100 hours of gameplay, because just these two guys working for 1 year and a half could do that. And to tell anyway, so we developed, for example, the fact, so if you see here in the image I'm sharing you see yourself with the mantle and a ton of information and data on top of it. And we found that this was not very easy to read, because all the strategic and elements there, like relationship with the Pope, the Emperor, the towns, and how your politics is affecting food production, and how charisma, and how many, like in the very end, we added the cardinals. So some towns have cardinals, and if you control a majority of the cardinals, then you can elect a new Pope, which will be yourself, of course, which also determines the only way to end the game without dying, which is, again, spoiler, by becoming Pope, conquering Rome. And the Pope is the only person who can proclaim saints. So the only way to you become saint while alive is to become popess. So, and this is something very hard to obtain, but many players told me that they reached this. And so that is basically, because one of the scoring system of the game is how, when you die, and it's quite funny, I think, how the game will list all your sins. There'll be a quick trial. The game will list all your sins, and from your sins will compute how many centuries and years it will take you before you can possibly be. So they're somehow forgotten as it happens, and somehow you can become saint, and you will be proclaimed saint. So if you behave really terribly, like you conquer all the Pope towns, and somehow your beliefs are really, really heretics, like, I don't know, like horrible things like women can have the same rights as men, or things like this, which actually Fra Dolcino did, which is amazing. You can find it in the 14th century Italy. And so things like this, then it will take you thousands of years to become saint. So if you can shorten up better you play somehow. And the final thing is to, of course, become saint while you're still alive, which I already spoiled you how to get. And so for example, so the fact that the cardinal seats are generative at the start of a new game, they're not in the same places, already gives you pattern of conquest once you want to become Pope, because they determine different patterns of conquest. There are 47 towns to be converted. And so another thing that we added, so we progressively added these layers of narration and possible stories, that because when you go to convert a town, you have to march, and of course you can beg during the march. Not everybody begs, like friars with book, they refuse to beg because they don't think it's dignified for them, or cavaliers, they don't go around begging, but most other units will. And so they can gather food, and you have to eat before reaching the town, do a picnic, and so on. And so we thought this is a bit of a repetitive process. So after a while, if you survive, supposing you survive, which is non-trivial for a few turns, you start meeting bizarre characters that are trying to sell you stuff. Sometimes can be like an illusionist, can join your movement people who are not actually convinced by your creed, but he will tell them your creed in such a way to convince them that they're actually fitting to they should follow you. Or you find a seller of donkeys who actually tries to convince you that these are great horses, so you get cavaliers on donkeys, which is also quite funny if you pay enough to get them. Or you meet a bishop who, of course, is trying to sell you sanctity in change of money, as it happened at the time and probably still happens, and so on. And then there are special events, so like historical events, like if the Pope dies and a new can be elected, or it can be a crusade. A funny thing that can happen if you attack a lot the church, the Pope will proclaim a crusade against you. So, and this can be very harsh. I found the players find hard because they go back to Assisi, which is the town source where you always start, and you find it invaded by the troops, and you have to reconquer your own town, and it's not that easy because the bishop that the pope puts there is quite powerful. So, and can be a harsh ending to your career. And so all these are little variations in the flow and the narrative that somehow support replay and adapt. So I call it so kind of incremental. So this is not narrative structure that was supposed to start, was designed at the start. The narrative structure designed at the start is the choices between rules that society at the time were possible at the time. So different setting, different kind of government, different kind of economic distribution, and so on, and lifestyle and reporting.
So this was an incremental addition of features and ideas that sort of evolved almost organically via playtesting and iterating and this sort of thing, right?
Yeah, and also feedback from the publisher. We had great. I must
Was
say,
it actually helpful?
oh, it was incredibly helpful. The team. I know that indie games often have problematic relationships with their publisher, but we had a great supporting team in Fire Squid, and several we adopted a lot of their suggestions. Like, for example, we simplified the flow from deciding things, going to the square, making a speech, going then to march to the town. There wasn't a further loop there, but it wasn't in the right order, and so on. I must say they give us. Oh, I like, and also this meeting the characters during the march for the begging, to give variation there. This came completely from the publisher, and we adopted it. So this, as an advice for indie gamers, I think it's very important to somehow develop your core base support and your code base, so that a lot of things can be changed in time without destroying the project. And for example, the fact that we had our narrative content external tool called Homer, we had animations in Spine, again in a separate tool, not everything done in the game engine. So this allowed for parallel works, and so we could evolve the narrative, we could evolve the animations and many things. So as much you can parallelize, and not everything goes into compiling and creating new version. Of course, we can half your development times and make it much more flexible in absorbing and adopting suggestions from. But just you must assume from the start that your game will not be as you design it at the beginning, because if you don't accept that, maybe indie games it's not. You should go and produce like atomic U-boats or something. I don't know. Something where the flow of production is more rigid, but in games that's not how it works, at least in my experience.
Well, in everyone's, really. It's even if you wanted it to,
if you want,
you wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah. It could be a path to disaster. Anyway, no, this was my material, let's say.
Thank you so much for this, Pietro. Seriously, that was eye-opening, and that was even more interesting for having played the game. Actually saying that the real life references to places like the Assisi Square and those things. That was, I mean, I was certain that Assisi was completely imaginary. I mean, actually certain that it was, but I love that. So thank you so much. Now we do have. I mean, I know that I have questions. I know that George has questions. I have to remind people that if they want to drop a question in the chat, we will be more than happy to share it with you. I also have to remind people that you are teaching a narrative design class at D6 Learning, so I will be linking it in the chat. and yeah, it's narrative design, obviously on video games, so people can have a look at that. Maybe wishlist it. We'll soon be announcing a course presentation too. But having said all those things, and coming back to the game itself, I mean, you mentioned that it had this good relationship with the publisher, and actually fertile relationship with the publisher, which is always nice and also relatively rare. And then my main question is, how exactly do you pitch a real-time strategy-based auto battler with sainthood at its heart to a publisher? I mean, did you use Gramscian logic to convince them? Did you use classic 60s movies to sort of tell them that this could work? What was it? Was it Echo?
Yes. I pitched them like the whole Pasolini black and white movie in Italian. No, that part wasn't there in the pitch. But I must say, so the game came about through. So the process wasn't exactly classical, let's say, in the sense that first the game was we participated in a Creative Europe media financing program, and we got it. So this is very important also for the fact that this is important for us, a financing source, but also means that you're committed to something that somehow has a meaningful message and content, and it's related to European history. So it also means, I mean, you have to somehow respect these guidelines that you submitted to. So that was the first source. A second source was that we accessed tax credit, which is the Italian tax credit for movies. Again, to access that, you have to, because for European regulations, you cannot fund, you cannot have state funding of an industry unless there's some, I mean, directly. You have to justify it by a special reason, which is in the case of movies and video games, is their cultural relevance. Again, so we had to respect those boundaries. Tax credit is not a financing form in a strict sense, but it's actually a very important form because basically allows you not to pay taxes on the costs during development. And given the level of taxes, at least in Italy, that's a considerable, like more than 40% cost cut. Then, so these were the first two founding sources. Then we self-funded the producing of quite a bold prototype, not the one I showed you, but it was already with models of towns and the units defined and so on. It lacked all this refined narrative integration. And with that, we pitched it to the publisher. The publisher is specialized in strategy games, and they, to me, surprisingly, they actually liked the idea of the historic and religious setting, which of course is bound to create a trouble in distribution, of course. Because if you're killing millions of people, nobody cares in games. But if you have, I don't know, the name of a saint, that's a big trouble. And so in this absurd ranking of values, so I was surprised that they didn't object to that. And we had, I won't go into detail because maybe it's reserved, but we had worldwide, we had a state censorship against this game and intervening in one of the largest game markets in the world. So that wasn't a light thing.
I imagine that it was not China. It was not India.
I cannot say.
No, I'm just trying to eliminate large. No, okay, but that's weird. That's unexpected.
It's not that I don't think it's neither weird. It's weird, but it's not unexpected, I say. And anyway, so being an independent, creating bizarre things always has a cost. And But anyway, I am very happy of the work that the publisher did. It was a great team, fantastic team, I must say. And I don't say that lightly, because I had other experience with publishers and were absolutely not fantastic, and as many have. But this team was really special, and so I'm happy to have worked with them. And they finance, of course. They were the fourth source of financing, and this is why the game, like, which is still, again, a very small game. So don't think you're getting into a huge production. It's two guys doing it, but the publisher provided things like translation in 13 languages, which we could never have afforded, and a lot of testing, also performance testing, and so on.
So, generally speaking, you would suggest people working, or at least attempting to work with publishers, at least when the stars align and when everything seems to be compatible with everything else.
No.
Okay.
Not in general, in the sense,
On a case by case basis.
on extremely cautious talk with other the indie developers on an extremely cautious basis. And my case was very, very good, but I would not subscribe any generalization.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Another question before we go on to you, Yorgos, is like, I mean, you've already sort of told us about how the game evolved. You told us about, you know, the inspirations behind it and everything else. Now, would you suggest that people look effectively outside of games and in the rest of, you know, cultural and art creation of humanity, like throughout the ages, to get their ideas? Would you suggest that, you know, starting from a plot based idea or a plot focused idea, like, oh, how do I become sent, might work better than starting from a gameplay focused idea, like a roguelike with RTS elements? Or is it something that, again, has to be seen at a case by case approach? Like, every game is different, like Football Drama, which, in case people don't know, Football Drama was one of the first games that Open Labs published. It's a very, very surreal football management game, which I love. I still love. But it's, I mean, what has come from? I mean, how do you start thinking about new games to make?
So I will distinguish what you want to achieve. Okay, so because in my case and in our case, we are mostly focused on doing something like somehow meaningful. Okay, so like writing what is normal in like writing a good novel, or let's say a decent novel, or a decent movie. But some people want to make games with other ends in mind. So like becoming, I don't know, having it played a lot, or because they want people to have fun, which is a term I always avoid. So I'd say if you are fascinated by games as a media amongst others that is capable of eliciting complex feeling messages and making people reflect, if you're in this state of mind, I think, well, first of all, it is extremely powerful media in this sense. I think extremely powerful and underused in this direction, and that contamination between this media and others, I think it's really crucial, and can also save you time, in a way, time and energy, in a sense, being more than time, energy can make you more aware of quality, because if you're building your own universe, characters, laws, often in science fiction, often often is done a bit quickly and a bit you unawarely applying patterns that hundreds of other games have applied. And so you're doing like the poor version of something that exists. So try to avoid that. Doing the poor version of something that we've seen again and again is it's not great from any point of view, from doing something meaningful, from selling, from marketing, from proposing to a publisher, or even having it self-published and judged as a decent thing. So instead, maybe talking with people working with other media, or people. Another thing, learning like to write decently. It's like programming. Takes years and years and years. So if you spend 10 years and you know that you're like a barely decent programmer, don't improvise you as a don't think that in 3 months you can become a good writer, story writer. No, you won't. It will be terrible. And the fact it's a game does not mean that the story behind it can be a terrible story. It will show. Something that anything that is done properly in media has this problem. They show low quality if you can't hide it. And so if you're interested in the context of what you want to produce, if you're interested in that, I think that looking at being inspired by other media can be very fruitful.
Fully agree. George, you want to ask something?
Right. Actually, I've been covered. All my questions have been answered by the. Thank you for the very in-depth presentation of the pipeline, the ideas behind it, and everything. It was really eye-opening, and for the commentary now at the end, fully agree. One question has been, in my mind at least, the pacing of the game and the structure in months. That's a creative decision that in many cases comes like naturally, and we don't normally question it quite a lot. What was the thought process behind the phases of the game and the whole pacing in months? Of course, it makes a little bit more sense than to do it like in the tick of the game to be years, for instance, rather and of course days. But what about that particular pacing and the phases? What kind of back and forth was there in the whole design process?
You mean the internal modeling of time internally to the game? Yeah, this is something always very interesting, and particularly when I did sports game, that's a crucial thing to get right. Okay, so how long?
I'll put that in the chat so that people know what we're talking about.
I know, like the fact that in FIFA, a football game lasts like I think 8 minutes is not by chance. It's something very
Definitely
very important. So here it's a bit different because let's say, well, there are two game loops very different. Let's say one is more strategical, and that is more ruled by the narrative. So it's like we thought of it like chapters of a book, basically. So usually there are choices among three, and there are 3 or 4 of them. Okay, so this is what a chapter is made. So a chapter is like relationship with food. What kind can we eat meat or not, or how do we approach it? Are we vegetarians or so on? Which were questions, of course, that they were discussing, so somehow these chapters give a pace, but then you have a problem of first replayability. As always, narrative in a game is a big problem. Replayability, you have to think about that. So we create a little engine that, of course, the first 2 chapters are always the same. And then the engine somehow has a list of topics, and it loops randomly around the topics, some semi-randomly because some have to be dealt with other. So that every time the resulting linear list of chapters is different, is not presented as a sequence. And as you tend to die a lot, probably you have seen different chapters in the first 5 or 6 or 7 chapters of the book. So you see different. So again, this. Then there is a completely kind of different consideration of timing of the conversion events. So how time flows there. For the relationship between real-time months or year passing and games is something I thought about in the beginning, and I was trying to think about that, whether it's week, month, and then I found out that nobody cares. At least in this kind of small game where people are quickly going through, dying, and whether I put months or weeks or really nobody cares. So this went a bit into the background. What is important in this case is how long do you take to conquer a town, and how much the battle, so how long it takes for a unit to somehow convert another or being converted. So there are all sorts, because of course in this kind of games battles can last from 1 minute to 5 hours, because if there is a balancing of power, why is it? Have you ever asked yourself, if you have two groups of military units and they're perfectly balanced, why doesn't the battle go forever, or they just leave in a draw? So this is a game where a draw cannot happen. So of course there are all sorts of mechanics that somehow, in fact, there is a function in the game which is a sort of exponential of effectiveness. And this, in order not to unbalance, to give an appropriate advantage to one of the sides, this was very important. This again was this was from feedback, criticism I received, that somehow this lasted too long because we were too much imbalance. So at a certain point, the effectiveness of attack between units, it's not always the same. It changes in time, and it grows exponentially on both sides of it. So attacks become more and more effective. So somehow we are sure that the battle does not last more than 2 or 3 minutes, and which is the ideal time. So, but this was it's a big deal in this kind of games. So you have to find meet and solve this problem about people getting bored, effectiveness, and how to keep it in balance. And the problem is complex because you have, in becoming say, you can be like 1 unit against 2 or 2 units against 2 to 5 against 5, which is a much wider and complex kind of setting. And the battles change a lot while you grow in movement and so on.
Okay, so again, that must have been something that needed a lot of iteration, right? A lot of testing to get right. But did you? I mean, I always think of testing as a very, very useful tool to refine things, but you always have to start from somewhere for something to test with. So, I mean, the initial concept of the battle, like of the main battle, which one of the main aspects of the core gameplay loop of Becoming Saint, did you start with an assumption that, okay, this thing shouldn't last more than, say, 3 minutes or 5 minutes? And if you did, like, how did you come up with this number? Was it just a random, number that felt right, or something else?
Well, my fortune here is that fortune and misfortune is being both a game designer and a developer. So I developed a prototype myself. So I can do this with no assumption, see how it goes. Then if you're a decent developer, you of course have to have no magic numbers in code. So you have a panel with all the timing and all parameters that you can maybe. Unity also gives you, this is nice, you can change them in real time and test while the battle is running, and change all the little numbers and so on, and see like sliders, have all the sliders. And so this again, it's very important to do this from the very start, because adding it afterwards is a big problem. So if you can parameterize, extract, and have a sort of configuration feedback panel of what you're doing, in particular if you're working alone or semi-alone, and so you have to do everything yourself. So this is very important. Another very important thing in this kind of game where there's a lot of iteration is to make the scenes. We made every scene like is self-sufficient, so you can launch the game directly from the battle, and the battle will run. And which, for example, which we did for debug purposes, of course. So you can try like 10 games very quickly. You don't have to go through all the narrative. That would be a sort of a nightmare, of course. So you can launch battles with different parameters one after the other. and which made it, when we came with the idea of having an environment in the game. In fact, from the start scene, you can do test battles, and it just came with the idea, oh, maybe players want to test the battles before actually going through, because the game is punishing, so you may die very soon. So if you test the battles before, maybe you learn how to do them and you will die less often. And this was just a link between the start scene and the battles, because we had built the debugging system that would make the battles self-sufficient. So it took like 1 day of development to build, instead of being a huge development thing, which would have been if the scenes were not self-sufficient from the start. Yeah.
Okay. So there's also there are a couple questions from the chat. First is one by Nifox. How easy was it to find your balance in Anchor?
My balancing?
Anchor, like I imagine the center of balance, or like the main thing around which you will balance everything.
Well, again, it was done by testing. Well, first, no, we started with spreadsheets. So spreadsheets with formulas, like all game design. So we had spreadsheets with your units, the other units, so the features. We started making formulas by balancing it there. But then you have to. So we had our debugging tool of battles allowed us to generate battles with 1 unit, 2 unit, 3 units, this kind of units, all automatically, so we could play again, and test all the parameters. And so it made a small town, a medium town, the hardest town, Rome, the easiest town, Gubbio, and all the in-between situations. So we go through testing, then sometimes you go back to the spreadsheets, update the spreadsheets, recalculate the basic values, and back. So this was back and forth. You can do it in such a small game. You can actually do the testing with this kind of process. And so the mathematical modeling of testing wasn't that needed, also because the parameters of the are very small. So values go from 1 to 4, as we said before streaming, and it's and so that keeps the let's say the combinatorial space to somehow manageable space.
Right. There's another question actually here in in the chat, which we probably need our friend to elaborate a little bit. But there's the question of how did you actually navigate the narrative? So I'm assuming that this has to do with how did you manage to package it into a game and actually deliver it. Please, the author of the question, if there's an elaboration here coming, please also add it in the chat. But
Yeah,
to
again,
reach a certain point for testing internally, how did you do it? To
yes.
reach a certain testing point.
Yeah, sure. Again, this needed a dedicated tool, because once you, as I told you, there are many chapters, and their sequence is not completely predetermined. So again, we had a specific tool built for which you could quickly navigate through all the choices and generate any kind of path, or start from the middle of like a game, chapter 20 of the game, and thereon navigate the path, and so generate all the consequences. Again, here we had the several spreadsheets with all the chapters and all the consequences, because like some choices that you make may change several parameters. Like a choice may put you both pacifist and cult, increase your political direction that way, and enable, I don't know, leopards as a unit, and other chapters away. So every choice that you make may have several consequences. So again, here what was needed was a tool live that you could play and replay in the development environment after doing some modeling with spreadsheets. I mean, these are not thousands of chapters, but it's it's quite a number of chapters. Then it becomes complex because, for example, I told you about the fact that the Pope can suddenly decide that there's a crusade against you, or decide that there's a crusade in which you can support. So these chapters are not in the normal flow of the game, but you have to support that they may enter the sequence at any time. Again, you need a tool that allows you to insert them suddenly anywhere to test whether it works. Because in games, many things are perfectly working in theory, and then they don't work in practice.
So while we're waiting for any other questions, I would like to point out that very obviously and quite emphatically, you did not quite visit this September, right? Having said that, when do you plan to actually drop by Athens?
In spring, I say.
That's a good answer. I'll take that.
In
I'll
spring,
take that.
Italy and Greece give their best, I think, in spring.
Yes,
So
that's true. That's true. Not too hot, not too cold. Okay, I like that. So again, I would like to give everyone else a last chance to ask anything they might have in mind. And while people are thinking about the questions, I have like one last question, which would have to be like, would you advise people to get into indie gaming? Would you suggest they start as interns in a larger studio? Do you have anything that you feel confident suggesting to someone who is starting out as a game developer of any discipline?
hard question. But well, what I can say, because it's something I've had quite some experience in, is that you can start and learn a lot in games without doing commercial games.
Hmm.
And that often is a much easier source of income than going directly into indie games, and sometimes more learning experience than going into a huge studio or doing stairs. So of course, doing stairs is okay, but so this is something I think that people that look at pure game design that do not respect enough. So doing game, I don't know, entertaining game for kids at a museum, or doing educational path for a school through a game and things like this. But there are many opportunities there for work, at least in my experience, decently paid. And for me, that's a path that where you can learn a ton of stuff. Yeah, so I don't think I will. So this is an advice which is not too dangerous.
Yes.
And yeah, but apart from this, the state of indie games today as a source of reliable income is basically
Mm.
close to impossible.
Mm.
So but what you learn doing games is useful in so many different fields. So there are two sides of the thing, and it's anyway, it's a very strange.
I think it's a fair and safe answer. It's not optimistic, not deep in despair. It's it's close to. I mean, this is a difficult time for indie games, and we have seen the fact that you get like 30, 40 quality games being released almost every day on a variety of platforms. So that's a lot. That's a lot. So George, yeah.
Oh yeah. Actually, I want to follow up on the advice, and actually, it's how I feel for the industry right now. The big question that, for instance, students and people we have collaborated with always ask is, okay, there's three of us, we are friends, we have collaborated in the past, we have studied in the university together, things like that. And how easy it is for us to create a game such as this? How much time will it take? Can we have a day job? These are all questions that people have, and they are considerations, and everyone needs to put food on the table. Um, so how did your team is two people? And how did you? This is a game of with production value of a bigger thing, arguably. How did again? Of course, there was a publisher, and things are, and in many cases, better this way. But if you didn't have a publisher, how would you approach such a game, such a production pipeline?
Sorry, before you answer that, Pietro, because that really fits with George's question. We have another question in the chat that asked whether you've planned about going to a publisher from the get-go, whether that was something that was part of the initial plan or just something that sort of happened due to necessity as time went on. So,
Okay, well, to be sincere, the choice of kind of game and genre was not completely unaware of the fact that it is a moment where this kind of game are seeked by because again, this is a bizarre field. Things go in waves. There are moments where it seems everybody's getting funding, moments where nobody's getting funding, moments where new platforms open, there are big opportunity, overpaid jobs, moments where platform close I mean, one thing I think I learned is if you find a way to just stay in the field for a long time, okay, and somehow survive, opportunities usually will come. Okay, so this is one thing. But to answer in specific of this game, I must say that we would have published it anyway because we had the funding from the Creative Media Europe, which is not fun. It's fantastic funding because it's basically it's not a lending. It's not something that it's not money they give you after you did the game. They give you money before making the game. So that's of course it would have been a million times worse game, believe it or not. So for the free, I'm a bit scared when students, because I've seen this question comes all the time from teams, from people doing courses. Because I've seen like 6 people. We're 6 people. We decided to do a game together, and then I say no. 6 people. So the first thing probably they should do is a short course on budgeting. Okay, so how much money does a company need to do for paying 6 people to develop? Probably if you're 6 people, you probably need an accountant. So it probably is already 7. How much money does need a company to do yearly, monthly, let's say monthly, to pay for 7 people? Okay, so that's a huge amount of monthly income you need to have. Okay, so you should somehow scare them with this, but that would be too discouraging. So maybe a smaller group has more chances. And the idea of making games while having a side job, I don't think it's a bad idea. I don't think it's a bad idea. That's what I did for years and years. The problem that they should have clear in mind: how could me and Pino do a game like this, which at least looks a decent game with some depth in 2 people in 1.5 year of real development, is because we have been doing games for 11 years. And so if I had to do this game 11 years ago, it probably would have taken me 11 years instead of 1.5. So there's a kind of exponential growth productivity in a game where development is one of the hardest. I've worked in several other development fields, and developing game, because it's basically multi-threading, has lots of problems. It's harder than in most corporate development jobs or things like this, or web development jobs. So don't, like, for example, if many people have done web development, don't think that kind of exercise can lead you directly to program for games, because that's not going to happen. It's just not the same level of refinement that you need. So yeah, be cautious. If you really intend to do it, why not? Not discouraging you, but you'll need time.
Yeah, apparently people don't find it discouraging as much as a reality check, which is always nice. So you're thanked for your replies. And another question: say you're back in day one of starting the Becoming Saint project. Would you do it again? Yeah, probably yes. But would you change something in the way you did things? Like any major regrets? Any major regrets are not covered by NDAs or anything of the sort.
Oh, of course. I mean, a lot of things I would change. Not that I don't like how it came out, but for sure, one of the things I would I don't know if I would let's say if
You wouldn't change the process, but you
no
already know things that would have been better from the start, and if you knew them.
no the process I think is fine, and the process how we produce it.
Mm.
I would change some of the mechanics because of course you learn. I am now very now designing a new strategy game, and so so it's hard to think about this because the fact that we did it somehow has created some milestones for us. So for me, it's very hard to think how I would think before it. But if I would now to make a new, let's say, if I, as I am now designing a strategy game, and in particular from the point of view of battles and conversion, I'm adopting kind of different principles. Like I'm using deterministic system. I'm not using random based systems and things like this because I learned that many players appreciate these features, and me too, in a way. I would like reduce the amount of multi let's say parallel actions, because for a very small, let's say a single developer, handling parallel actions is very hard and time consuming, and maybe people don't recognize it as much as hard it is. So maybe just don't do it, and the game can still be fine. So making more in sequence instead of in parallel, things like this. But this is after having released the game, because you cannot change. You are a different person somehow when you did it.
Yeah, and you've already solved problems that you couldn't have solved before actually going into the process of creating the thing,
Yeah.
which is true. But the process is solid, so that's that's good to know. So you already mentioned a new game, right? So
Yeah.
apparently new things are coming.
Yeah.
Um, if you'd like to share anything on that, or if you can
Oh,
share anything on that.
it's not well, it's the first time ever I talk about it, but it's okay. It's still a strategy game. It's still a medieval game, and
No football involved. I see.
no football involved up to, yeah. My football was invented a couple of centuries after
Hmm,
the 15th.
sadly, yes.
And but maybe we'll reach that. Who knows? But, yeah, well, there's a historical event I'm thinking about, which is the revolt of the Chompis, which is an extremely interesting event because the first, let's say, revolt of specialized workers, so not of peasants, but in history is the revolt of the Chompi in Florence is the first revolt of specialized workers who managed to gain power, which is quite extraordinary. So until the French Revolution, this hardly ever happened. But they managed to gain power, then they started killing, and I mean, things got messed up.
That's the point of gaining power, after all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And anyway, I think it's historically not as well known as it could be, and it's really special event in a sense in history. The fact that there was a revolution of specialized workers, they managed to completely control power for some say few months, depends how you look at it. So it was at least 3 months, and have this kind of sort of communistic management of the richest town in Europe. So it was very bizarre.
That's
And,
fascinating.
and it ended in a bloodshed, of course. But
Yes. No question. I mean, this is a game that is relatively close to becoming sent in a variety of ways, right? It's a historical game, it is strategic, and my question, and this is, I promise, the absolutely last final question I'll be making is, what do you carry over from becoming sent? I mean, besides the experience and everything we learn from each and every project, like, what do you carry over? Do you carry over technology? Do you carry over tools? Do you carry over parts of the things you created within the engine that could be handy? Um, Whatever assets. So, do you take anything, or is everything again done from scratch?
Okay, so this is another scary features of video games. So video games are not an industrial process. Video games, this is something that people that come from other sectors absolutely have to understand, and clearly corporate and buyouts like using AI tools are completely blind about this fact. Video games are craftsmanship. So they're the most of all software and all media. They're the most crafted tool. So you want, and this is what people want. So you want every single button in a game like Becoming, say, even a small game, to be telling a little story, and so be different from every other button in the game, which is exactly the opposite of what you're doing when you're doing, I don't know, an iPhone management application. Okay, you want everything to be uniform. This is exactly the opposite of what happens. You want every drawing to be curated, possibly hand drawn, and with no strange six fingers coming behind your head or things like this. So unfortunately, so this is how the basic thing is. Now, in this case, in our case, the technology, the context, the team, everything as it has been carried over from roller drama to Becoming Saint with all the improvements and so on. And again, it will be carried over. It will still be a long, painful, and handcrafted process, but I think we got some things right in Becoming Saint, really right, and I will try to carry them over it, like the approach to history, to humor, the mixing, the fact that narrative emerges from the mechanics and not vice versa, which I think, got a bit wrong. And so yes, so many things would be shared. Like also I think the humor and the style, I think it's been appreciated, and I really like to use it again.
Nice. Thank you so much. So again, thank you so much. I think we've been on for an hour and a half plus a few extra minutes. So thank you so much for your time, Pietro. That was lovely as always. And also thanks, George, for being here. And thank you everyone for staying with us, and thank you for your questions, and thanks for the interesting. Again, I want to remind you to absolutely take a look at Becoming Sand. You can wishlist it. You can. I think there's still a demo, right?
Yes, there's a demo, and now there's a 20% discount because
And there's a 20% discount.
sale.
I've also linked it in the chat, and you can find it in the video description. Also, a reminder that Pietro is teaching the narrative design classes at this Learning, so you can have a look and keep an eye out for our course presentation announcements. And with that, and also thank you, Chris, and thank you all for the kind words. And I think that with that, we can call it a night or an afternoon or whatever it is, wherever you are. And hope to see you soon. We'll be talking and doing events throughout the month and throughout next month, and we'll have Pietro on a variety of those too. So everyone, good night. Thanks for everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
time,
Pietro.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.